Hey BookTube, it's Charlie from Reader Turned Writer, and today I am doing my March 2018 wrap-up. March was a very good reading month for me. I had a lot of time to read because I kept waking up in the middle of the night and not being able to go back to sleep, and we had a lot of sick kids and just different things made it so that I had a lot of time for reading. I read a total of 14 books for about 3,134 pages. I am working on getting through the Count of Monte Cristo still, but I haven't been able to get through it. I started the beginning of the month. I was about page 100 and now I'm almost to page 400, so I am making progress, but it has over 1,000 pages in it, so I still have a long way to go, but I am loving it. I also am listening to an audiobook with my husband that I haven't finished yet, but we're like 95% of the way through it, so next month that will be included in my wrap-up as well. I donated 1 book and I bought 7 books. I DNF'd 3 books, meaning I got at least 20% of the way through those 3 books and then decided not to finish it. Of the books I read, 8 were written by female authors and 7 were written by male authors. Star-wise, I read 6 5-star books, 4 4-star books, 3 3-star books, 1 2-star book, which is rare for me, but I finished it for some reason instead of DNFing it, and I did not read any 1-star books. I read 1 classic, 1 fantasy, 1 romance, 1 historical fiction, and then I read a ton of nonfiction books. This is because I read a parenting book that I really liked, and then I had this idea that I wanted to do a video about my favorite parenting books. But then I have a whole bunch of parenting books that I wanted to read before that, and so I ended up reading a lot of parenting books in addition to the nonfiction books that I'd already read for the month. So yeah, 10 nonfiction books. Of the books I read, 3 of them were from the library, 2 of them I owned, and 9 of them were ebooks. None of them were audiobooks because, like I said, I haven't quite finished the audiobook that my husband and I have been listening to. Of the books that I wanted to read this year from my list of books that I really want to read this year, I actually read 5 of them, and then 2 of them I DNF'd. I started reading them and then I decided that I actually didn't want to. One of them was The 4-Hour Chef, and I just didn't like the way it was formatted. I didn't really like the content that was in it. I didn't like what it was aimed for. I was not the target audience, and the target audience was someone who wants to become someone who just cooks in the kitchen using spices and making up their own recipes, and that's not really what I was looking for when I picked up the book. I also DNF'd Free to Play, which was a book that I wanted to read on free play for kids and how good it is and how it's okay to let our kids play rather than focusing so much on academics, especially in the earlier years. And it was just too old of a book, and the formatting made it really hard to read, and I felt like the information was really repetitive of things that I had already learned, so I just decided that I wasn't going to read that one either. So now I will just jump right into the books that I read. The first one was The Lost Heiress by Roseanna M. White. I gave it 3 stars, and it was one of the books that I wanted to read this year. It is a Regency romance, and it was really good. I had a little bit of a hard time getting into it at first. For some reason, I just didn't click with the main character, basically throughout the book, but the plot got a lot better and I was a lot more interested. And then there's actually another main character, her love interest, and I clicked a lot more with him and really liked him. Even though the plot was a little unrealistic, it was really exciting and fun, and I liked the romance in it, and it had an emphasis on God and trusting God, so it is kind of a Christian Regency romance, but I really enjoyed the book as a whole once I actually got a few chapters into it and gained some traction. And then I read How to Write a Copy That Sells by Ray Edwards. This is a book that my husband got to help him just learn better how to write emails because he started using his email list more. And even though I am not writing, I actually found it pretty useful for BookTube because I feel like it's useful for any content. One of the chapters talks about titling your work and titling your emails, basically like the subject of your emails, and I actually found that section really useful for titling my YouTube videos, and I got a lot of really good ideas from that. Some of the book wasn't as useful to me, but I still thought it was a well done book. I actually only give it 3 stars because the first half of the book I thought was better than the last half, and I felt that it was really repetitive as well. The third book I read was How to Talk So Little Kids Will Listen by Joanna Faber. I gave this 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. It is one of my new favorite parenting books. It was so useful and so helpful, and I've already used a bunch of stuff from it, and seen results with my kids and my nieces and nephews. And Joanna Faber is actually the daughter of the author that wrote How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. And it's basically a lot of the same ideas in that book are found in this one, but from what I've read of reviews, I haven't read the other one, but from what I've read of the reviews, this one's actually a little bit better just because it wasn't written in the 80s and slightly newer and a little more condensed. It's not quite as long, I don't think, and I really, really liked it. The first half was the best part. It focused on basically like main principles, and then the second half of the book was like, how do you apply those principles and those parenting tools to specific situations with kids, which I think would be really useful as a resource as a parent. Like, you're like, oh man, my child, I'm having trouble with them lying, for example, which is a really, really common thing for kids to go through. It's a developmental thing that kids go through when they start lying and different things. And so then you can go back to the book and see how to best handle it and some tools for handling it. But for just reading through it, the first half was the best part for me, and that's what I gleaned the most from. It's basically a book about how to parent your child respectfully and talk to them in a nice and loving way while still being able to discipline them and make sure that they aren't just running wild, and making sure they have, you know, doing what you want them to, like putting on their clothes and different things. And it gives you tons and tons of different techniques and tools and ideas for how to do that with your child so that you can have more patience with them and so that they will do what you want more, not in a manipulative way, but just in a, you know, people like to be talked to like this. People don't like to be told what to do, they like to be told the problem, those kinds of things. It was so good. If you are a parent, I definitely would recommend reading it. It's a really quick read, especially if you just read the first half and then read the second half as needed. Fourth, I read My People the Amish by Keim, and this book was about he's a grown man now, but he grew up in an Amish family in an Amish community, and it was kind of about his experience there and moving away from the Amish community and religion, and I think he became Baptist, and it was a very interesting read for me. I learned a lot about the Amish. I gave it 4 stars because I thought it was well done, and the ending actually made it so I gave it 4 stars instead of 3, but when he was talking about his childhood there and things, you could tell he was pretty biased with the Amish and the way that they do things, and kind of against them a little bit, and it kind of bothered me a little bit reading it because of that, because I felt like I wish I could have heard the other, like his parents, for example, their side of the story, you know. And he wasn't trying to be mean, you could tell in the book that he was trying not to. He just had a very strong bias. I really loved the ending, though, of the book as well. Then I read Grimm's Fairy Tales by the Brothers Grimm, and there were a lot of fairy tales, so I just kind of read some every day was kind of my goal, and I was able to read a lot when my kids were sick, and I really enjoyed it. I love fairy tale retellings, and I've never actually read the originals. You know, I love the Disney movies and Elle Enchanted, things like that. And so it was kind of fun to see the kind of original fairy tales, and some of the endings, it was exactly how I expected. Some of the endings were happy, but some of them were very gruesome or you know, like violent, and they all taught moral lessons, and I just thought it was a very good book. I rated it 5 stars. Then I read The Three Tales of My Father's Dragon by Ruth Stiles Gannett, and I actually read this with my daughter. She will be 4 in October, and she really, really loved it. I really enjoyed the first story. There's 3 stories about the dragon, and I really enjoyed the first one. It's kind of showing the little boy here coming to rescue this dragon from these wild animals, and the little boy has to outwit all of the wild animals, and it's fun to see how he does that. The other stories are just kind of adventures that they go on afterwards, and they weren't bad, and my daughter still really enjoyed them, but I was a little more bored during that part and I didn't enjoy it as much. But I still thought that it was a really good book. I do want to mention that you wouldn't want to read that book by yourself and as an adult, probably, because it just wouldn't be as enjoyable, because it is definitely aimed at younger kids, like 4, 5, 6-ish. Then we come to my 2-star book, Benny and the Bank Robber by Mary C. Finley. And the first chapter I actually really liked, and the middle of the book I was okay with. But the rest of it, I just didn't like. Between the first chapter and the middle of the book, it was just, the pacing was off, the plot was unrealistic, things happened randomly and sporadically, and one thing going for it was that a lot of the time I didn't know what would happen in the plot, but after the middle part of the book definitely went downhill and became, not only was it sporadic and random and unrealistic still, but it was also like really boring. Like I didn't really care, and it just, I would not recommend it to anybody. It was a Christian adventure book basically, and I guess maybe it's just not my kind of book, but I felt like it wasn't very well written. The characters weren't that fleshed out. Characters would like change their religious views just on a whim. All of a sudden one day they'd be thoroughly against it and a terrible person, and the next day they'd be like a changed person, and that's really not how it happens. You didn't get to see anything from that, and things would just like happen randomly. Like at one point his grandparents show up and try to take him away, and you're like, what, he has grandparents? Like what the heck? And it's just super, I don't know, I just did not like it. Then I read When Beauty is a Beast by C.C. Sorenson, and I thought this was like, it's a marriage book about things that women do in their marriage that mess up their marriage basically. But it actually turned out to be a book more about like the abuse that women do to their husbands and different ways that women abuse their husbands in their marriage, which I think is a really important topic. I just think that maybe they could have titled the book differently, because it was definitely not what I was expecting. I will say that I felt like a really good wife after reading it because of some of the really extreme stories that they shared and the crazy things that apparently wives do to their husbands, where I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe people actually do that. And so yeah, that really helped me feel good as a wife to read some of those stories, because I was like, oh, I would never do that to my husband, you know. My husband and I do have a really good relationship and a good partnership. I was able to see some things that I was like, oh yeah, I could do this better, or oh yeah, I kind of do this, you know. And I want to become better in those areas, but a lot of it just wasn't very applicable to me because I don't abuse my husband, and a lot of the chapters were really focused on the abuse, and that's the main premise of the book, is the abuse that wives, I don't know the verb there, how wives abuse their husbands in their marriages, and how it can be detrimental, and how wives a lot of times don't even realize that they're abusing their husbands. And so it was a very interesting read. I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't as applicable to me personally, and because of the way that it's titled, I thought that it would be. Then I read Getting to Yum, Yum, Y-U-M, by Karen Lee Billion. She actually wrote a different book, like a memoir, about moving to France with her kids and how they learned to eat a lot of different kinds of foods there, rather than just like crackers and breads, which is what they were really picky eaters before going to France, and now they're not. And I think she has a blog too, I'm not 100% sure. But it was a very good book. I knew a lot of the information in it already, but I gave it 5 stars because I thought it was organized well. I thought that the content in it was fabulous. I thought the ideas in it were great. I definitely have used some of the things that I've learned from it already and seen results. Like, for example, my daughter eats Brussels sprouts with breakfast sometimes now, and just different things like that, where before she didn't want to. It was a really good book, and it actually made me as a parent want to be more willing to try new foods as well, and so we're trying to do that as a family, to learn to try different foods besides what we're used to. We already eat pretty healthy as a family, and so that's not something that I felt we needed to work on as much as just being open to trying new foods and new recipes, and being willing to try things that I'm like, oh, I don't like that, but then being willing to at least just try it, because our taste buds can change, and that's kind of the premise of the book. Then I read Siblings Without Rivalry by Adele, Faber, and Elaine Mazlish, and these are the same authors that wrote the book that I mentioned earlier, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. I got this one from the library, and I didn't feel like I really needed to read it right now because our kids do get along really well, but it was a really good book. I gave it 5 stars. It was organized well. It had a lot of really, really good ideas and a lot of tools for parents, not just in how they interact with their kids with siblings, but also how to react when siblings do things to each other or say things about each other and just different things like that. And I thought it was a very, very good book if you have more than one child, and especially if they're struggling to get along. This is a fabulous read. Then I read Free Range Kids by Lenore Skenazy. This one was also from the library, but I actually already returned it. I actually only gave it 3 stars. I loved the premise, which is that we as parents shouldn't be as afraid to let our kids do things and to be independent, and that kids do need to be independent and learn to do things on their own, like walk to school even, so that they can become capable adults and be confident in themselves and not be scared of everything in the world. The problem was I didn't like the way it was written. First of all, it felt too extreme in the other direction, because she was fighting against parents who are too protective of their kids, but she went kind of too extreme. I think there's a really good middle ground where we can teach our kids how to be safe and make sure that they're still safe, but also allow them that independence and not be as worried as parents. So I definitely think that's a balance that you need to find as a parent, but I felt that in the book she didn't really talk about that as much. Like, she didn't even talk about things like how to make sure that your kids are safe if you're letting them go places until like halfway through the book at least, and even then it was like she didn't really talk about it that much, and I felt like she could have talked about that more, because I think that's an important part of letting your kids be free range, is teaching them the skills that they need to be safe. I also was just kind of irritated by the way that she joked. She was trying to be funny. I guess she's like a newspaper columnist. She made a lot of jokes and different things, but the way that she talked about things felt really disrespectful and ignorant to me at times, and just not respectful of the way other people parent. Even times when I agreed with the things that she was kind of joking about or disparaging, it bothered me because of the way that she was talking about it, like sarcastic and kind of mean, and like, I'm better than you because I let my child eat potato chips or something, you know, and that just really bothered me. And so even though I really loved the idea of it, I did not like the actual book. So if you know of a parenting book on like free range and that kind of thing that's really good, let me know in the comments below, because I would love to read it. Then I read No Drama Discipline by Daniel J. Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. This is another library book, and I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was incredible. I think every parent should read this book. These are the authors that wrote The Whole Brain Child. They're like neuroscientists or something, and so they look at children's behavior and how parents can help their kids from a neurological standpoint, and how, you know, and so in this book focuses on discipline, and so it looks at things like spanking and timeouts and different methods that we use as parents and their preferred method, and how it affects kids neurologically, and they really talk about what works and what's effective and why you should do it. And they have, you know, sections at the end talking about how you can't always do this. Every parent is going to get impatient and parent and discipline in a way that's not necessarily the best way, but how that's even good for kids, and how we can turn that around and make it a good experience for them, and just different things like that. It was such a good book. I actually am going to probably have my husband read this. I read a lot of parenting books and tell my husband about them, but it's not very often that I have him actually read the parenting book. But this is one that I want him to read. I think every parent should read this, because it will change the way that you discipline your kids. It will change the way that they act, because the way that they discipline actually helps the brain's neurons form new pathways, so that later, and as the kid gets older, they aren't as likely to act out in ways that you don't want them to, and so then you don't need to discipline them or teach them to behave differently, because they're behaving in a more mature and better way, and which is, I think that's fabulous. It will also change the way that it will also change your relationship for the better with your child, because the way that they discipline in this book, you always connect first with your child, and the more you connect with your child, the better your relationship will be with them, and the less you lose your patience, the better your relationship with your child will be. And so I think this is just such a fabulous book. The next book I read was on my phone, and it's called How to Talk to Your Child About Sex by Linda and Richard Eyre. And I have heard a lot about this book. I've been recommended this book by so many people. I actually would give it a 3 out of 5 stars as well. I didn't love it. I was very disappointed. A lot of the concepts I really liked, but the majority of the book was sample dialogue to have with your kids starting in preschool and working your way up. And honestly, I just felt like the dialogue, they had too much dialogue for the parent, first of all, because it felt like the parent was just talking and talking and talking. They'd talk and then there'd be a little line for the kid's response, and there'd be a huge paragraph where they'd talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, almost to where you were lecturing. Even though you're stopping and asking your child and trying to engage them, you're also just talking too much, I felt, because a lot of times when we're teaching our kids, we just need to learn to not talk quite so much. I've also talked with my husband a lot about just how, because of this book, about how we want to handle sex ed and different things. And we've already started a little bit with our daughter, who is turning 4 in October. We have some children's books that we read with her that just teach different body parts and who has what, you know, the differences between guys and girls. And we have one that like talks about how a baby grows inside the mother's stomach, uterus, and just different things. The book opened up a dialogue with my husband and I so that we could talk about our views and feelings towards it, which was really good. Oh, the other thing they did is they had a lot of analogies, and both my husband and I agree that analogies when it comes to sex just usually aren't very good. I've never heard an analogy for sex that I've really, really liked that I would use to teach my kids about it. I think it's better to just be direct and simple and straightforward about things. The last book I read is Screenwise by Devorah Heitner, and this is one that I wanted to read when I heard the name of it. It's more aimed at middle grade and tweens and teenagers, but it was a really good book. It had fantastic information about it. I love the emphasis on being positive about media and screens, and accepting your kids' use of them and getting involved with them and being involved in their screen life as well as off screen. And I really love the idea that we're teaching our kids to be responsible with media so that we don't have to micromanage their media as they get older, but that they will have the principles and the skills that they need to be able to handle that, but then also for parents to keep an open conversation with their kids going about screens and things, so that if there's ever a problem, the parent can be there for the child and help the child through that. So that was my reading month in March. I was able to read a lot of books, and I felt like a lot of them were really good. Even though most of them were nonfiction books, that was kind of fun for me. I'm really ready to jump back into some fictional books now. I'm kind of tired of parenting books and I'm ready to take a break. But it was a fun month. Let me know if you've read any of these books in the comments below and what you thought of them, or if you are interested in reading any of these books. And thanks for watching my video. I'll see you in the next one.